recording. It is September 17th. This is ESM 105. Okay, it's 2025. I don't think I'll ever need that in these recordings, but who knows. Okay, welcome back, folks. Here we are. We're finally going to get into our week 3 material, but technically it's week 3 to 4 material, so, that's not so bad. It'll probably bleed a little bit into week 5, but we're doing well on track with the schedule. So it's week 4. As a reminder, go to Canvas each week, click the little button. It's going to tell you what we're doing. This week is just read Future of Life. It's pretty good, Week 5 next week, you've got quiz 2 due by September 28th, 11:39 p.m. And once you're done with that, you can start reading Cradle to Cradle. The books you have left are Cradle to Cradle and Stuff. And Stuff is, I don't know, I think it's like 60 pages or something. So look forward to a nice short book if all this reading's been getting to you. Cradle to Cradle's also a pretty darn digestible read. It's all about like supply lines and trying to produce things that then are already ready to be recycled. It's got some cool ideas in it. It's pretty neat. So that's what schedule we're on right now. Oh, don't forget, that annotated bibliography still exists. It's still a looming specter in the distance, all right? So it'd be great to start getting citations together for the annotated bibliography. The research project information tab right here gives you all the details of what you need, including an example of an annotated bibliography created by Jeff Dunk, the previous instructor of this course. Cool? Any questions about anything? Okay. Quiz, 60-minute attempt, 11 multiple choice, written response related to the reading. It's all based on the week 3 to 4 lecture PowerPoint, which we will 100% be done with by the time this quiz opens up. The quiz becomes available on September 24th. Okay. There's all of the basics taken care of. We talked about mycorrhizal associations at the end of our last lecture, but it was a little rushed, and it's a topic that people usually are very interested in. So I'm just popping up the mycorrhizal symbiosis slide one more time in case people have some additional questions about it. The reason that I bring it up here is because it's especially important as a player, or the plants with mycorrhizal associations are especially important in continuing the phosphorus cycle. Because remember, phosphorus is really limited in that it's held up in rocks, and something needs to free that up. And fungi, they exude these very powerful enzymes which can degrade things that are otherwise resistant to degradation. That's why they're such good candidates for things like bioremediation. All right, you can break down toxic compounds that otherwise are difficult to denature. Yes, please. Yeah, they're very good at dealing with these the polyphenolic rings that tend to be really resistant to degradation, but also are toxic. Yes?
Also, the mycelial structures between trees have been noted to... trees have previously not been recognized to do kin recognition, like a tree that produces a seed and sprouts another tree. But through the mycelial network, the older tree can send nutrients to the younger trees and recognizes them as their kin, as their specific kin.
It's very interesting. I mean, mycelial networks connecting plants in general is absolutely fascinating. So, and a lot of these processes can even lead to some plants parasitizing others through the mycelial network, which is also very interesting. There's so much to understand and study and know about this. It's something that you should really be aware of, okay? Because most plants have them, all right? And the plants that don't have them are the exceptions. And dynamics in different types of mycorrhizal species, okay, can determine a lot of things about forest compositions. Like, for example, the understory of the redwood forest being made up mainly of members of Ericaceae has a lot to do with the fact that their mycorrhizae can maintain activity in the presence of the things that get leached out of redwood detritus. It's super cool stuff. So I didn't want anybody to feel like we breezed past it, since we did breeze past it, but now I've gone back and, you've seen it twice now. Any questions? Oh, this stuff? It's cool. Awesome. Weeks 3, weeks 4. Here we are. Evolution, natural selection, and basic ecology. So I can never help myself in the early PowerPoints when we're covering like basic biology. I always jam ecology stuff in there. And then in basic ecology, you're going to find that some of this stuff we've already spoken about. But we'll have a chance to discuss it again. And hopefully in light of the basic bio and basic chem background that you already have now, you'll have maybe an opportunity to develop more nuanced understanding. Or that won't work, and that's okay too. We're all just getting through. It's all fine. All right, we're gonna talk about evolution. You're gonna leave this class knowing what evolution actually means as a defined term, because I told you before, right? Like these terms, the definitions are really important, and evolution's often used in the common vernacular as meaning a positive change, but it's just not true. We'll talk about evolution, the different types of evolution. It's going to be really interesting. Okay. So, you ready for your evolution talk? Here we go. Evolution can be thought of as sort of an umbrella term. I will now draw a flawless umbrella on the board. Every umbrella has a curved handle, and they all have a little band of fabric right here. I don't know if you've noticed that about umbrellas, but every umbrella has that. Evolution is the umbrella term. We'll talk about some concepts that fall under the umbrella of evolution. So, for evolution to occur, a genetic change needs to occur, okay? Evolution is defined as a shift in frequencies of genes from generation to generation. Specifically, gene forms or alleles, okay? So any process that leads to shifts in genotypes over time is leading to evolution. And that change in genotypes and gene prevalence over time is evolution. If a bacterial population over time develops or starts to present more genes for antibiotic resistance, then that population of bacteria has evolved. All right? Now, this type of evolution has given them a capacity to survive in the environment better. All right? And that's good for that species. Okay? But not all types of evolution are necessarily positive for the species experiencing them. Because remember, evolution's just a shift in allele frequencies. Alleles being the different forms of genes. Please.
I've never heard this kind of notion that not all evolution is positive. Can you give me an example of negative evolution?
100%. All right, so let's say that you've got a big population. I can give you a real world example. I'm going to give you a conceptual example, then a real world example. All right? Conceptual example. There's a big population of beetles here. All right? Some of them are brown, some of them are white. The brown beetles are better camouflaged for their environment. All right? Then a tree falls and it kills all of the brown beetles. Now there's no brown beetle genes in the population. The population has technically evolved towards having more white beetles, okay? However, it has not been in a beneficial way for the species. Yeah, question?
So the population of all beetles has genetically changed to include more white beetles and fewer brown beetles.
Yes, the gene frequency in the population has shifted towards more white beetle genes. And that is evolution, because evolution is just a shift in gene frequencies or allele frequencies over generations. Yes?
Focus on the population relative definition
Awesome.
It's often like talked about like, oh, this individual just happens to genetically mutate and
Yes.
be better, and then it slowly disperses into the rest of the population. That's a really good example.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, evolution is a process that occurs in populations, right? Even though sometimes, I think that it usually gets caught up because every textbook talks about evolution and begins with mutation is the foundation of all genetic diversity, right? And so you get into that, and it's just like it's not a necessary sentence, I think, for when you're introducing these concepts. But yeah, awesome. I'm really happy that helped. I promised you a real world negative selection example. This is a contentious one because it's based on fossil records and, but there's a species of elk, okay? And the species of elk kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger antlers. It was like the Irish elk. If you see recreations of them, they're massive animals, right? And one theory is that the elk that had bigger antlers, they mated more. This is helpful? Is this helpful? This doesn't mean something, right? Is this like a new, like, hip thing that's bad to do? I never know. Like, okay, good, cool. So big antlers. Here's one of the theories. The antlers got so big because the elk that had the big antlers mated more that it made them unable to move freely through the forest where their habitat was. So that's an example of something we call sexual selection, which is a mechanism that can lead to evolution, but does not always lead towards better adaptation. You shifted the frequencies of the genes in the population towards more big elk horn genes, right? So it's still evolution. It's really fun, I think, to think about like what actually is evolution.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm really happy to hear it. Yeah.
Would a negative example of evolution be like if a certain plant went extinct due to like its pollinator not existing anymore because of like something like a tree smashing that population and just making it?
So that's a really cool example, right? So I'm going to kind of paraphrase it and we'll see if we're on the same page. Awesome. So you've got a plant that's co-evolved with a pollinator, and now both of them are dependent on one another. The pollinator is dependent on it for a food source, and the plant maybe even for protection, and the plant is dependent on it to vector its pollen. Right, exactly, yeah. So now that was evolution that led to the genes for making those types of flowers and structures more prevalent in the population. But then if the pollinator goes extinct for whatever reason, now that has become a negative impact, right, towards its survival. So yeah, absolutely, that would be an example. If you've gotten so specialized, but specialization to having a very specific pollen vector allowed you to probably be pretty successful. I got one before you. Yeah, is that solid for you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Awesome, yes.
Evolution, if you get like enough adaptations, does it become a different species?
It 100% can, and it all depends on, did you develop enough new characteristics that you no longer can mate with the other members of the species? It happens, and we'll talk about speciation in this very PowerPoint. Yeah, there's lots of cool ways it can happen, and I'll talk about a couple of them. Yes? Okay, yeah. I'm not super familiar with it, but you can reacquire. So, as I have had de-evolution presented in like the articles that I've seen about it, right? Characteristics that were there in the past can become silenced, but the genes can still be present, and then those genes can be reactivated, right? So that's when and to be fair, my understanding on it is through like lab work of like, we're trying to rescue the woolly mammoth by de-evolving it, by unsilencing genes that are still present in the genome. So that's the way that I have seen the phrase de-evolution used, and it's possible. It's 100% confusing, because like de-evolution, if evolution's not a directional process that exactly, it's all evolution. So the only like true de-evolution would be we're going to shift allele frequencies back or gene frequencies back by unsilencing genes that are present in the genome. You know what I mean? And it's still like, is it de-evolution? Yeah, exactly. Because it's not directional. That's the key thing here. Sorry, did I see another hand over here, I thought? Yeah.
Now that we're on the subject of bringing back the woolly mammoth, is Jurassic Park actually theoretically possible?
It would be, it's very exciting. It's a very exciting concept. I mean, there's a, if it, see, yeah, it's happening all the time. I don't know. I am not a good enough geneticist to really say, can you bring these species back? There's lots of cool stuff with using extant, currently existing species. Like you might have seen the work, it was like 10 years ago, and then they got shut down, where they were taking, I think it was chickens, and getting them to express dinosaur characteristics. It was really cool work. But, you know, I would say probably rightfully so. There's a lot of regulation around doing that sort of stuff. So, you know, I don't know. Maybe. I'd go to a Jurassic Park, I think.
I'd go see a T-Rex.
Yeah, it'd be pretty cool.
Did you learn anything from the movie?
Yeah.
No, actually.
Wait,
no,
I never watched past the first 20 minutes. Yeah. I just see the dinosaurs. I go, ooh, and then I turn it off. Yeah.
got into that topic pretty interestingly. The original main character of the first movie and the second movie was saying, like, those aren't what John Hammond created wasn't dinosaurs because they mixed amphibians. DNA doesn't last in nature much longer than like 500 years.
Yeah.
So that
it
just
just denatures.
dies, right?
It
Like
denatures.
yeah.
It just doesn't become. It's not the same molecule anymore, and it doesn't really fossilize.
Which makes, yeah, the only real way to get at that is finding the genes that have been maintained in currently existing species. Yeah, which is all
So it's very theoretical.
very.
Non-zero.
But there's an idea that you can find a bunch of silenced genes in currently existing species that speciated from dinosaurs, pull those existing maintained genes that are just silenced out, and then stitch them together.
I don't know. It's a really cool concept.
It'd be really cool.
Hang out with chickens.
There you go, yeah. Yes, question. They are cool.
I was just gonna say, there's a book called The Science of the Extinction, How to Clone a Mammoth by Beth Shapiro. She's like a genetic biologist or something.
There you go.
And she talked about how they've been doing like excavation projects in like Siberia and Russia and like places in the world. And basically they can't ever find enough like viable mammoth DNA to be able to like make complete copies of it. So what she said they're trying to do is select for certain traits in Asian elephants, like the fur, and being able to live in like warmer climate or colder climates. So it's not really like the mammoth that they're bringing back. They're kind of just piecing it together.
You're trying to get a descendant to evolve back in that direction, which is sort of where you would use de-evolution as a phrase. You know, I gotta be honest, ESM 105 has some of the most interesting, fruitful conversations. I have 109 people in Bio 105, and it's just like the quietest classroom because of that. Awesome. Well, we made it through one slide, and there were 20 minutes into the lecture, so
Well, I apologize for leaving us off topic.
it was good. It was good stuff. And I think it's going to make us all sort of better, you know, set into this. Let's go ahead and let's move through a few slides here. Natural selection, okay? Natural selection is a force that leads to evolution, but it is not the only way that populations evolve, okay? So under the umbrella term of evolution, we've got natural selection. I actually already told you about sexual selection, okay? In sexual selection, certain genotypes allow you to mate more and make more offspring, but they're not necessarily better adapted to the environment. Big old peacock feathers don't make you better at escaping predators or moving through your habitat or flying, all right? But what they do is they make you more likely to mate, and that can lead towards an evolution leading to more big peacock feathers. Solid? Okay, we got natural selection, sexual selection. We've also got artificial selection, which is a term for when, it's usually a term used for when humans select something because it benefits us. So all of the selection for different fruit types, right? Like you've seen naturally occurring corn, and it's like 4 big caryopsis fruits on a single stalk, and it's not very appetizing looking. But then, with repeated artificial selection, we get current commercial corn. Okay, so artificial selection is like human-imposed selection for something that we want. And then the final term, the final category, or the final mechanism that can lead to evolution, which remember, is just a shift in genotype frequencies. That's all it is, okay? Is genetic drift. And genetic drift is random changes that don't have anything to do with whether the genes are adaptive or maladaptive or desirable. That's when the tree falls and kills all the beetles. That's an example of genetic drift, which includes things like bottlenecks, founder effects, etc. Yes?
The word artificial.
Yeah.
Other areas in agriculture.
Yes. So, yeah, absolutely. So we use the term artificial, and we reserve it usually for talking about human-imposed changes. But other animals can select certain species to have certain characteristics because, they're desirable, right? And so the question is, like, well, now, but those are animals. So that's actually natural selection because now that plant is more successful because it's being farmed by this animal. And because they're different from us, we call that natural selection.
The argument that humans have artificially selected themselves to be somehow different from nature. Because if we're not, as we are animals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The term artificial selection is used because it's so much more rampant and widespread and we have such a larger impact. Yeah. Yeah, post-industrial selection would work great as well. I mean, you have a lot of pre-industrial selection for things like fruit types. And animal husbandry and agriculture have been around for so long before the Industrial Revolution, and that leads to all sorts of things, like how tightly seed is held in a plant. All sorts of really fascinating stuff in co-evolution of plants and animals. So artificial selection is 100% just, it's like, why is it not natural selection? If you ever read The Botany of Desire, he talks about that a lot. He'll be like, oh, the tulips are very successful. There's a lot of them. So that's a successful species, right? But they're only successful because we've artificially selected them for characteristics we like, and we grow a lot of them. They don't do well, these selected traits, they don't do as well without us there. So, yeah.
Is mutation a form of genetic drift as a random influence?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a mutation that occurs leads to a small shift in genotype frequencies, because now you've got a new gene. Usually it's a non-functioning version of the gene that gets produced via mutation, but that can be just as important as changing it to a new function. Yeah, awesome. Good stuff. Okay, slide 1. We're almost done with slide 1, I think. Natural selection, okay? It is specifically when there is a selective pressure in the environment, something like increased temperature, something like increased predator presence, something like high rates of salinity in the soil. And that pressure selects for certain genes to do better, okay? So having a highly saline soil, you're selecting for genes that allow, let's just say for an example, like a deeper rooting system. It's not the best example of an adaptation to a saline soil, but we won't worry about that, okay? So natural selection is what we usually think of when we think of evolution. Something is better able to survive in its environment, it has adapted, okay? And natural selection is the only force that leads consistently to adaptation, okay? So an adaptation is when you're better suited to your environment as a population due to a shift in genetics. And only natural selection will consistently lead to that. These other things could, but they don't always. Okay, so selection acts on phenotypes. Phenotype is the physical expression of the genes that you have. All right? You've got all of these different genes, all these instructions inside of your DNA, all right? Some of those genes get turned on, some of those genes are turned off, some of those genes are on in certain cells and off in other cells, all right? But your genotype describes your genetic sequence. Your phenotype describes the physical expression of your genetic sequence. So the plant has a purple flower phenotype because it has a genotype with purple flower genes. Okay? Cool? Alleles, I put a lot of text in this. I love putting a lot of text in this. Oh, I wanted to draw a Punnett square. What was I thinking? Okay, cool. Alleles, what are they? They are different versions of genes, okay? Now, you've probably seen a Punnett square before, right? Where you've got like a monohybrid cross illustrated. These are different alleles for the same gene. Homozygous dominant, heterozygous, homozygous recessive. Does this look vaguely familiar? I'm seeing not a lot of nodding heads. Okay, awesome. So the alleles are different gene forms, all right? There are some really complex patterns of inheritance. It's really complicated, and I don't think we should get muddied. I don't think I should get too muddied down in this, actually. All right? So I'm going to choose, I'm going to choose not to, okay? Now I'm going to do a little bit, just a little bit. Okay. Purple flower, all right? There's an enzyme, okay? There's an enzyme that's involved in generating a purple pigment. Cool? This version of the gene encodes the functioning enzyme for making the flower purple. This version of the gene, this allele right here, encodes a non-functioning enzyme where the flower won't be purple, okay? Many organisms have 2 copies of each gene. We have 2 copies of each gene. So if you have one functioning, one non-functioning, sometimes that's enough to give you what we call the dominant phenotype. I'm hoping this sounds kind of familiar. Recessive, this is the recessive allele, okay? Takes 2 copies to demonstrate the recessive phenotype. In the flower example, these 3 flowers, these 3 genotypes would lead to purple flowers, and this genotype here would lead to white flowers because they can't develop the enzyme. Cool. There's your little refresher on basic Mendelian genetics and dominant and recessive traits. Now, of course, there's a lot of complication added to this. Complex patterns of inheritance. It's important to recognize that those exist as well. Yes?
So the three, those are, the other 2 are purple with the other lowercase a because the purple gene is dominant, right?
Exactly. One copy of it. A dominant allele means that one copy of it is enough to express the phenotype. So 2 copies means you got extra. 1 copy is enough, though, to express the dominant phenotype. Yeah, and then with sometimes the heterozygous organism, it only makes half as much of the gene product, so you get some sort of like intermediate phenotype here. So sometimes it would be like red flower, white flower, pink flower. All right.
What makes that phenotype dominant compared to the other one?
So in this example here, the recessive allele does not encode a functioning enzyme, and the dominant allele encodes a functioning enzyme. This enzyme is involved in making the pigment, the flower pigment. All right? So this is recessive because even if I just have 1 copy of the functioning enzyme, I can still make the pigment. So the same thing happens with like lactose intolerance, right? We're all diploid organisms, meaning we have 2 copies of each gene. So if you've got a functioning gene for making the lactase enzyme, you can usually digest lactose. If you've got 2 copies of the functioning gene for the lactase enzyme, you make more, all right? So usually people with like a moderate degree of lactose intolerance will be heterozygous for that characteristic, where they don't have 2 functioning copies of the lactase enzyme gene. And then people with 2 copies of the recessive version can't make the lactase gene, and therefore they are lactose intolerant.
Okay, so like I guess in this case, like A would be like the recessive gene would just be like no color.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the recessive phenotype is
It's not functioning.
no color because it's non-functioning.
Think of the capital A as purple and just look for the capital A.
Okay.
Yeah, and it'll always be, in all the examples that you encounter like this, where the dominant allele is the capital letter and the lowercase allele is a lowercase letter. But there's so much variability. There's things like codominance, like your blood types, there's multiple dominant alleles, but we don't have time. So infuriating. It's so infuriating because it's so interesting, okay? But here's the key takeaways here, all right? What's the genotype and what's the phenotype? But I didn't feel like I could really talk about it without doing something, okay? This here is the central dogma. The central dogma is something that's dogmatically adhered to, and it's central to all of biology, okay? DNA contains information that is read to produce RNA, a temporary sort of intermediate messenger molecule. That's what the M stands for here, is messenger RNA. And then that RNA is read to make a polypeptide. So this is how DNA directs protein synthesis. And you know how important proteins are from our protein talk that we did. So all of this because we're talking about evolution, and I can't in good conscience talk about that without talking about basic genetics. Okay, moving forward. Evolution, what is it? It's any time there's a shift in allele frequencies within a population, or when one gene becomes more common than another. One form of a gene becomes more common than others in the gene pool of a population. Here we go, natural selection, artificial, sexual, genetic drift. I talked about them all with you already. What the heck? No big deal. All right. Cool. A lot of things can lead to shifts in allele frequencies. If they lead to shifts in allele frequencies, they caused evolution. That's the definition of evolution. So now you get to go out into the world understanding when to use the word evolution and when it's better to use a more nuanced term. All right? I hope that has added to your experience as a scientist. Questions about this slide? I think we kind of knocked it out of the park in the beginning with our broad discussion. Okay, acclimation, adaptation, 2 important terms. They are different. And once again, adaptation is kind of like evolution in that people use it for all sorts of things when it's not the right term. It'd be like, oh, I can adapt. It's like, no, you can't. You can acclimate. You can sure as heck acclimate to your conditions that you're dealing with, but you can't adapt. You think you're a population? No way. So adaptation, all right, is specifically, adaptation is specifically accumulation of new traits, okay, or within a population, okay? So accumulation of new patterns of gene expression or accumulation of new genotypes. Or it can be an outcome of evolution. Natural selection consistently leads to adaptations to the environment, right? But other things here could theoretically lead to adaptation as well. But adaptation is an outcome of evolution, whereas acclimation is when an individual changes something, okay? An individual adjusts its phenotype to better suit its environment, okay? This is due to something called phenotypic plasticity. I'm really happy to see that I put the phrase on the slide. Very happy about that. So you got your phenotype, right? If something's plastic, it's malleable, okay? Watch this just shatter and shoot out into somebody's eyes, all right? If something's plastic, it's malleable, it's adjustable, okay? That's why plastic's so valuable, because really it's just hard oil. That's all plastics are. It's just hardened oil. And so you heat them up, you can meld them, and you can make them into all sorts of shapes. They're plastic, okay? Phenotypic plasticity tells you how much an organism can adjust its phenotype. How plastic is my phenotype, all right? If I go and start to live in a cold environment, will my body generate more hair all over? to make me warmer. That would be an example of phenotypic plasticity. Can my body adapt different cell types, produce different ratios of enzymes to help me digest things that I wasn't digesting before? That's an example of phenotypic plasticity, okay? These are all examples of acclimation, okay? So an individual acclimates to its environment. My examples mainly come from plants, okay? If you take a plant that was growing in the shade and a tree falls down and now it's in the sun, it's going to start making leaves that are very different from the leaves it grew in the shade. They'll be bigger, they'll have higher concentrations of chlorophyll, all sorts of things like that, all right? But it's the same organism, it has just adjusted its phenotype. Do we see how that acclimation is different from adaptation, I hope? Yes?
Sorry if this doesn't make sense, but
No problem.
An organism grows up in one environment and then acclimates to a very different one and then has offspring. Would the offspring be closer to the post or pre or post acclimated organism?
So the old answer to that would be, so we've got a flower, right? We've got a plant, and we're growing the plant at the bottom of a mountain. Then we move the plant up the mountain, right? And then it reproduces. Let's say you put two of them there, and then they reproduce with one another, so they both have bottom of the mountain genes, and now they're growing on the top. They're probably struggling a little bit. They try to acclimate as best they can. They make small changes, right? Am I tracking the question so far? Okay, awesome. Now they mate. This is what mating looks like. And they make an offspring. The old answer would be, well, this offspring will be better adapted to the low elevation habitat. But with newer understandings of epigenetics and how you can make changes to gene expression, so these plants can adjust gene expression patterns to make themselves better acclimated, okay? But then they can pass that on to their offspring. So while their offspring still has more low elevation genes, it has shifted its gene expression patterns so that now it's better adapted to the higher elevation. But is it adaptation? Because it didn't change the sequence of genetics. It didn't change its genotypes. It just changed patterns of gene expression. It depends, once again, on your definition of the word, right? How do we define adaptation? So it is a shift in population and over generation to generation, and most people would call that epigenetic adaptation. Solid?
Yeah.
Awesome, got one ahead of you. Yes? No? Okay, yes.
That theoretical thing with plant, is that plants? Like,
Oh, where they have different sun versus shade leaves, that one?
like the one you said that they can change their gene expression. Can everything do that?
Yeah. So epigenetics didn't even really get recognized until I was in undergraduate. That's when people started to like pay attention to it. It happens in model organisms all the time. But these model organisms aren't everything, right?
That's more what I meant. It's
Yeah.
just like a majority of organisms.
Majority, yes, 100%. Majority of organisms, our current understanding is that epigenetic regulation is pretty widespread. Maybe not so much in like prokaryotes, you know, that have the smaller genome, but they have their own regulatory mechanisms which then can evolve, but they cycle so many times through populations. I think I had a hand up here and then I'll get you, yeah.
Oh, me?
Oh, yeah, you.
First? Okay. So when it comes to acclimation, is it more like you're turning a gene that you already have on and then you can then pass it on?
Yeah, well so the being able to pass it on thing is the epigenetic inheritance. But acclimation is usually more like you're turning up or turning down a specific gene, or you can turn on, let's say you have an enzyme and you're trying to turn it off, you can turn on another gene to turn that enzyme off. So it's usually regulation of the genotype that you already had, whereas adaptation happens when the population shifts in what genotypes it has. All right, I got one ahead of you, but I'll be right there for you, yeah.
Could you think of like a plant or animal that like doesn't need to, like never needs to adapt and only needs to acclimate, and it can be in like any environment, or is it like?
Well, adaptation is a natural process that's going to happen with anything that reproduces from generation to generation. Anything that sexually reproduces makes a population that has genetic variability, and some of them, even if it's slight, some of those individuals will be better adapted to their environment and therefore will survive at higher frequencies. And so there'll be slight shifts in the genotypes.
Acclimation just always leads to adaptation then.
Acclimation does not always lead to adaptation. Acclimation itself allows individuals to survive better, but then the capacity to acclimate is genetically encoded, so you can be adapted to have more phenotypic plasticity. It's really too nebulous to give an always, sort of like all or nothing answer to.
Okay.
Yeah. This is my symbol for like it's all interconnected and nebulous. Solid?
Yeah.
Not the most satisfying answer I know. Yes.
So an individual can acclimate,
An individual can acclimate.
and then if they are a parent with another individual, their gametes can adapt, and then the person that they produce is whatever species they be, they are adapted slightly, and then if that child reproduces as a parent continuously, then the gametes are what's adapting as the individuals are acclimating more.
The gametes that get produced, because we're looking at this as acclimation is an individual level process and adaptation is a population level process. So when we're talking on the population level, we're assuming generation to generation, and it's more that the number of gametes that are going to be used to generate the next generation is determined by which individuals are better adapted already. So the gamete itself it's not usually long-lived enough to like have a stage of adaptation. It's that the genes contributed to the next generation are selected by all these forces of evolution.
Really small level in the first step.
And if we're talking about epigenetics, we can talk about, an individual can acclimate and then pass that acclimation on to its next generation. But that sort of it just gives us crossover here and it muddies the whole dichotomy. But whenever you see a dichotomy in biology, that's what you're asking for? Awesome, yeah. So that's exactly it. It's the intermediate piece here of acclimation that can be inherited, which was, but that's 100% true. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
No, this is great. I couldn't be happier, honestly. Yeah.
2-hour lecture period.
You're right. We just need it. Let's do a 4-hour. Yeah.
I'm just slightly confused. If
Please.
acclimation is adjusting its phenotype and not its genotype, then that changes its genotype. So how does acclimation lead to adaptation if adaptation changes its genotype?
Absolutely. I probably should never have even mentioned epigenetics because that is what's confusing the whole matter. But it's so important, in modern. Yeah. What's that?
Can I take a guess?
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah.
Okay, if a specific species were to acclimate, and I'm going to use the word turn on or turn up.
Perfect.
A particular gene that it already inherently
Great.
has.
Yeah.
Then it mates with another member of that species that also has that same acclimation.
Mm-hmm. It's also turned on or turned up that gene.
Yeah. Say the result ends up being a passed on acclimation, but they don't need to turn that on.
Yes, exactly. So now they get to start with that gene that was an acclimation already on for the environment. They might do even better than their parents did, who had to deal with that period of acclimation.
Isn't it the same genotype?
It's the same genotype.
But just like slightly different.
It's
Therefore, it makes it new.
The phenotype's entirely different is the thing, because if you have your body is full of genes that are not being turned on right now. They are not activated. They're just sitting there silently. If you activate those, you change. You change your phenotype, but your genotype did not change. But your pattern of gene expression changed. So you can inherit a change in pattern of gene expression, and that's epigenetics. Epi meaning like on top of the genetics. It's really complicated, but yeah.
I think I'm getting really attached to the idea that adaptation is a change in genes itself.
And you should be attached to that because that's the standard ecological and biological definition.
Genetics is but also here.
But also here, you got it. Okay, yeah, that's 100% it. Adaptation is a big term, acclimation's a big term, and it's usually taught as these are the two things. But there's more, you know?
Can I just have like epigenetics as like mini adaptation in my head? Is that wrong?
It's the first step of adaptation.
Yeah.
Acclimation, then there's epigenetic
It's,
acclimation, and then it turns into adaptation.
but not always.
Yeah.
It's not the only way that adaptation happens.
Through environmental stress.
Well, and adaptation can also happen just through natural selection, where you kill a bunch of individuals don't survive because they don't have genes for our antibiotic resistance.
Can I muddy the waters more?
That sounds like a great idea. Yeah.
So there are people called intersex individuals that have XX chromosomes, XXY chromosomes, and they can phenotypically express their sexual characteristics and what we call male or female or something in between. And you might be intersex. You may identify as female and have all the sexual characteristics of being female, but you might have XY chromosomes.
Yeah. So you've got a genotype, and then you have a different phenotype being expressed that's not always perfectly predicted by the genotype. So that even further muddies the waters. But if we go straight textbook is like adaptation is a shift in gene frequencies from generation to generation, right? And acclimation is a change within an individual as it adjusts gene expression patterns to its environment. And epigenetics is when an acclimation can be inherited without an adaptation, if we're using the textbook definitions here. Yes. Good.
And our legislators do not understand any of this.
They're not scientists, but you all will be. All right. Well, listen, we got through, I think, 5 slides today. We'll do great. We just need to be through this PowerPoint by the end of next week. And as I just finished up the week 5 through 6 PowerPoint, so I'm learning what works as far as our pace in this class. So by the end of this, there will be a full, well-fleshed out ESM 105 section that you got to have a hand in creating. So thank you for your consistent feedback in those discussions. It's very useful. Thank you for your participation. And you let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to help however I can. Have a great day, everybody. It's been a pleasure once again. Thank you.